They were never officially named. In police files, they were an organized criminal unit. On the streets, they were whispered about as them. They moved like shadows across the outskirts of cities, striking, taking what they wanted, and vanishing before dawn. Broken doors, burned warnings, terrified faces. Their signature was fear itself. At the center was Viktor Hale, calm and precise. He didn't need to shout. People leaned forward when he entered a room, drawn to his quiet authority. Fear, he said once, works best when it arrives politely. Lena, his second-in-command, handled confrontations with sharp efficiency. Her boots echoed like a warning. One night at the docks, a trembling manager protested. "We paid last month." Lena leaned close, whispering, "This is a new month. Pay, or regret it." Thomas, the driver, mapped escape routes obsessively. Mara handled finances, laundering money through businesses that seemed innocent. Elias listened and collected information, and Jonah, the youngest, delivered messages that carried life or death weight. Their terror spread. Fires broke out in warehouses, mayors received burned photographs on their doorsteps, and police chased shadows. Inside the group, tension grew. Viktor sometimes spoke to himself in rare moments of reflection. Fear is useful, he thought, but it's fragile. Control demands constant motion. The breaking point came in Crestfall. A local gang refused to submit. Lena wanted to make an example. Viktor warned, "Too visible. If we let this go, everyone else will test us," she argued. Gunshots rang out in narrow streets. Sirens came too soon. Jonah froze, terrified. They escaped, but the silence afterward felt heavier. Even trapped, Viktor's mind worked like a chessboard. Every glance and gesture in the cell was a signal, a plan forming. Jonah's whispered, "Feel kill me." Viktor replied softly, almost gently, "Not if we get them first." And though the cities thought their nightmare had ended, the true terror was only beginning. Viktor sat on the cold concrete bench in the cell, the echo of footsteps in the corridor outside keeping time with his own slow, deliberate breathing. He traced a line on the wall with a finger, imagining it was a map, one of the cities, the routes, the alleys, the shadows where they used to move unseen. Jonah had talked. The betrayal cut deeper than any gunshot. Viktor's mind wandered, replaying every step, every decision, every careless moment that had led to this. But it's never truly over, he thought. They caught me, yes, but they didn't catch the idea. Fear isn't locked behind bars. Outside, Lena sat in a separate holding cell, her hands cuffed tightly in front. Her jaw was set, but her eyes burned. She whispered to herself, counting, planning, imagining. "They think this stops us," she said quietly, almost laughing. "They have no idea." Thomas was silent in his own corner, staring at the ceiling. He muttered route numbers and backup plans under his breath, as though saying them aloud could keep them alive somewhere, somehow. Mara, in contrast, sat perfectly still, like a statue. Inside her mind, numbers still moved, debts and payments and threats that hadn't yet been settled. Elias had vanished entirely. No one knew where, no one dared ask. That absence alone made the others uneasy. It was as if one part of the group still prowled free, whispering in the wind, reminding the cities that the nightmare was not fully over. The interrogations were relentless. Police officers, detectives, journalists, all came in waves. "Viktor Hale," one officer said, leaning across the metal table. "Do you feel remorse?" Viktor smiled faintly, the kind of smile that unnerves even the most hardened lawman. "Remorse," he repeated, testing the word. "For what, exactly? For fear? For compliance? Or for being better at this game than anyone else?" He shrugged. The cities survived. People always survive. Fear, that's different. That lingers. Meanwhile, Lena had her own confrontation. "You're nothing without him," the detective told her, trying to provoke a reaction. She leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "I was never nothing," she hissed. "I am the storm that follows the calm." And calm. That's gone now. Days passed. Weeks. The world outside tried to ignore the truth, but whispers always found ears. Some business owners paid extra security fees, secretly hoping Viktor or Lena might appear again. Some kids ran home after dusk, afraid of shadows that didn't exist. And in the quiet, in cells with bars and steel doors, the members of the group plotted, not just escape, but the return of the principle they had built. Control through precision, through fear, through inevitability. Viktor's monologues became longer, darker. Every city, he told Jonah one day, when the boy was brought to the same cell for questioning, is a living creature. You prod it. You push it. It bleeds. But it never forgets who caused the wound. And wounds. Jonah wounds teach obedience. Jonah swallowed, staring at the floor, wondering if he had ever truly belonged to anything but a shadow. Lena, restless, found ways to communicate with the outside. A guard who believed in bribes, a sympathetic courier who slipped messages in through ventilation shafts. Each note was small, cryptic, almost playful, but always carrying the weight of threat. We are not gone, one read. You only think the storm has passed. Even in confinement, Viktor's mind moved like a chessboard. He didn't speak of plans aloud, he didn't need to. A glance was enough. Jonah noticed at first. A tilt of the head, a squint, a subtle smile when an officer left the room. Viktor was already plotting the next move, calculating the next ripple of fear. Then one night, Lena whispered to Viktor through the thin walls separating their cells. "It's time," she said softly. "You know what must happen next." Viktor traced the lines on his wall, thinking of cities, alleys, docks, warehouses, faces of terrified shopkeepers. Finally, he spoke. "We remind them," he said. "Fear is not ours to command, it is theirs to remember. And memory is longer than bars, longer than steel, longer than justice." Somewhere far away, Elias listened. He had returned silently, invisibly, carrying information like a shadow. The cities thought they were safe. But the true terror had never been the gang itself. It was the certainty that what had been unleashed could never fully be contained. And as Viktor lay back on the cold bench, Jonah beside him, Lena whispering through the walls, Thomas muttering plans, and Mara calculating the uncatchable flow of money, a single, shared thought filled every mind. This story isn't over. It never will be. The night was thick with fog when the first signal came. A faint tapping, almost imperceptible, echoed through the ventilation shaft. Viktor tilted his head, listening carefully, eyes narrowing. "It begins," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Lena pressed her palm against the wall separating them. "I'm ready," she said. Jonah shivered beside him, unsure if he was terrified or exhilarated, or both. Viktor's eyes softened briefly. "Good," he murmured. "Fear is useless if we are not precise." The guard at the end of the hall yawned and leaned back, cigarette dangling from his lips. He never noticed the tiny shimmer of movement as Elias slipped silently past, merging with shadows, carrying a set of keys stolen from another unsuspecting officer. Thomas had spent days memorizing patrol patterns, whispering them to Jonah so the boy would move like a ghost, invisible to human eyes. Mara had passed along coded instructions to sympathetic contacts outside. Safe houses, stashes of cash, transport that couldn't be traced. Every detail was accounted for. Every risk measured. Every escape route memorized. By midnight, Viktor was on his feet, testing the bars and locks as Lena and Jonah mirrored his movements in their cells. "Careful," Lena whispered. "Every sound is a signal." Viktor smiled faintly. "We are symphony conductors," he said. Every note timed perfectly. And then, the first lock clicked. The second. And suddenly, they were moving, silent, deliberate, a shadowed machine of intent. Outside the prison walls, the fog concealed their approach. Viktor led, Lena following close, Thomas and Jonah flanking. Mara appeared at a prearranged point, carrying small packages, food, water, money, and most importantly, instructions. Elias moved ahead, watching, listening, anticipating. The city slept, unaware that its predators had slipped the chains of confinement and were already plotting the next ripple of terror. They reached the old docks first. Crates lined the warehouse, casting long shadows under dim yellow lights. Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "Check corners. Watch for patrols." Thomas crouched beside a stack of barrels, tracing escape routes with a finger. Viktor's gaze lingered on the water, imagining the network of paths they had used countless times before. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest, yet he mirrored the calm precision of the leaders. He had learned quickly, fear was only dangerous if it made you stop moving. A patrol approached, 2 officers with flashlights swinging lazily. Mara pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath, as Viktor stepped forward. Remember, he whispered to Jonah, timing is everything. And then, almost imperceptibly, the patrol passed, unaware of the shadows moving just behind them. Lena exhaled softly. That's 4 seconds closer to freedom, she murmured. Viktor nodded, eyes glinting with satisfaction. And 4 seconds closer to making them remember us. By dawn, they were miles away, in the abandoned industrial quarter on the outskirts. They paused, circling in a loose formation, catching their breath, listening. Viktor allowed himself a rare smile. We're not just alive, he said quietly. We're ghosts that the city will never exorcise. And ghosts don't forgive. Lena looked at him, a grin touching her lips. Then we make them fear harder. Thomas checked the maps one last time. We can't stay long, he warned. They'll trace us if we dawdle. Mara handed out bundles of cash and supplies, her eyes sharp, calculating. Jonah clutched a small satchel, realizing he had been initiated into a world he could never leave, a world where precision, patience, and silence mattered more than morality or law. Elias appeared last, stepping out from the shadows. They'll be looking, he said softly. But not here. Not yet. Viktor's gaze swept over the group. Good, he said. Then we move. Every city will feel the echo. Every shadow will carry our signature. And every mind that thinks it is safe will learn again what we taught them once. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the group disappeared into the maze of abandoned streets and warehouses, vanishing like smoke into the waking world. Behind them, the city stirred, oblivious to the storm that had already begun to gather beyond the horizon. Viktor's voice lingered in their minds, though they did not know it. We are not finished. We never were. Somewhere far away, in quiet offices and empty houses, someone would soon realize the warnings had never truly ended. Fear, once planted, does not die. It waits. And so do they, Viktor Hale, Lena, Thomas, Mara, Elias, and even Jonah, preparing, planning, always moving. For in the shadows, the group was no longer bound by walls or bars. They were eternal. The night of the final operation arrived like a predator stalking its prey. Viktor stood atop the ridge overlooking 3 cities at once, their lights glittering like tiny, oblivious jewels. Lena crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the streets below. Thomas checked and rechecked the escape routes on a foldable map, muttering quietly to himself. Mara adjusted the packages of cash and equipment, each bundle marked, each note accounted for. Jonah felt the familiar churn of fear in his stomach, but it was different now, controlled, almost useful. Elias had already gone ahead, slipping between alleys and rooftops, a ghost with one mission: to anticipate every move the authorities might make. We hit them at the same time, Viktor said, his voice calm but unyielding. No mistakes. Every city feels the pressure. Every mind knows it is ours to unsettle. Timing is life. Lena nodded, smirking. Then let's remind them why they whispered our names. The first strike was subtle. Lights went out in the shipping district of Brenton. Alarms buzzed briefly and then died. Within minutes, a convoy of unmarked vans moved silently, retrieving what Viktor's group wanted and leaving only shadows behind. Jonah followed orders perfectly, delivering messages to frightened shopkeepers, reminding them of the last time and hinting that the next was even closer. In crestfall, Lena led a smaller strike team. She confronted a rival gang who had refused compliance. They expected an ambush, but Lena's precision was terrifying. You tested me once, she whispered as the leader raised his hands. Now you remember why you obey. A single gunshot fired into the air, enough to convince without spilling unnecessary blood. The leader crumpled to the floor, trembling, and she left as quietly as she had arrived. Meanwhile, Viktor orchestrated chaos in the river city, a web of misdirection and precision. Buildings were surrounded, alarms set off, but always just out of reach. Streets became mazes of uncertainty. Police, confused and overwhelmed, chased ghosts, unaware that the real players had vanished before they arrived. Mara counted cash, traced paths, and calculated the cost of every move. Elias slipped in and out of buildings, ensuring no trace of their presence remained. As dawn approached, the 6 regrouped at an abandoned factory on the outskirts, a place Viktor had already marked on a map only he understood. We are ghosts once more, he said, surveying the horizon. And ghosts, he added, voice dark with satisfaction, leave impressions that last longer than walls, bars, or bullets. Jonah exhaled, finally allowing himself a grin. He had survived the night, learned precision, and understood fear. Lena slapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Welcome to the real lesson," she said. "Fear is never about violence. Fear is about control, and only those who move with it survive it." Viktor's eyes swept over the city lights one last time. "They will rebuild," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They always do. But they will remember. And memory is eternal." Then, as the sun rose, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, the group vanished again, into the forests, the alleyways, the rivers, leaving nothing behind but whispers, rumors, and the lingering sense that someone, somewhere, had already touched the edge of terror and survived. Cities would talk, authorities would speculate, and newspapers would print theories, but the truth was simple. Viktor Hale and his group had become untouchable. Not because they were invisible, but because fear had become immortal, and it lived forever in the hearts of those who thought they were safe. And somewhere, in the quiet, Jonah finally understood. The story was never about escape. It was about the legend. The legend would never end.